Chapter 12. When Two Truths Go to War. A UFO investigator handed copies of a photograph to his associates David and Peter, who were both experienced photographers. The photo showed an odd-looking flying saucer. It was silver, about 30 feet in diameter, and could best be described as resembling a wedding cake. The craft hovered a few feet above a parked van, right next to a tall, leafy tree that rose even higher. The picture had been taken in the countryside of Sackler-Durstelen on the 26th of March 1981 by a Swiss man named Billy Meyer, who was allegedly in regular contact with extraterrestrial beings from the Pleiades. "Boys, I need a thorough analysis of this photo from the both of you," the ufologist said. "Work solo on this, no comparing notes. 2 opinions are better than 1. I want you to put aside any personal prejudice and give me the facts about this picture." The following day, the investigator met with David first. "What have you got for me?" "Well," David said, "when I first looked at the photo, I knew something wasn't right. I think most people would get the same gut feeling without really knowing why. It's because our brain processes a lot of things for us that we take for granted. We've been looking at objects all our lives, basing our opinions on distance and size without really, 'Give it to me in plain English, Davy boy.' Basically, the saucer is slightly out of focus, and it shouldn't be. If you look at the van directly underneath, that's in perfect focus. The 2 things are supposed to be about the same distance from the camera, so they should both be in focus or both out of focus. This can only mean that the saucer and the van are not even remotely the same distance from the camera. The saucer is probably no bigger than a dustbin lid. Actually, it probably is a dustbin lid, and it's being suspended close to the camera. There's no escaping the facts. It's fake." "All right, David. Thanks for your insight. All that remains is to see whether Peter confirms your analysis." The investigator promptly visited the other photographer. "Well, Pete, is it real or fake?" Peter was visibly excited. "It's definitely real." The investigator raised a skeptical eyebrow. "And you can prove this?" "I can. At first I thought this was a bit silly. I mean, what sort of alien drives a vehicle that looks like a wedding cake? But I went the extra mile anyway. I scanned the photo into the computer and fiddled with the brightness, contrast, gamma level, and so on. Look what showed up, right there in the shadows where the left side of the saucer meets the tree." The ufologist peered at the monitor. His eyes widened in surprise. "The leaves on the tree!" "You spotted it. The branch is poking out ever so slightly in front of the ship, which is impossible if this is a dressed-up hubcap dangling right in front of the camera. As it is, there's no way that this thing is anywhere other than right there beside the tree. There's no escaping the facts. It's the real deal." Furrows of frustration appeared on the investigator's brow. "What's the matter?" Peter said. "Didn't David back up my assessment?" "No, he didn't." Peter spread his hands. "Well, what can I say? The facts speak for themselves." "Yes, they do," the investigator replied. "Yours and David's." "It's all well and good for Sherlock Holmes to say, quote, 'When you have eliminated the impossible, whatever remains, however improbable, must be the truth.' End quote. Arthur Conan Doyle, The Sign of the Four. But our intrepid ufologist is in a predicament where one perspective says it's impossible for this photo to be authentic, and the other says it's impossible for it to be fraudulent. In both cases, logic is being used to determine the truth. In both cases, the evidence seems conclusive. But due to the differing factors of what goes noticed and unnoticed, the 2 investigators draw entirely different conclusions, and only one of those conclusions can be true. Now we begin to see how slippery this concept called truth is, and subsequently how flimsy our determinations of possibility and impossibility. Clearly, one of the examiners made a wrong assessment of the evidence somewhere, an error that would have gone entirely unnoticed if not for having 2 heads in the game. This shows how easy it is to latch on to one or two fragments of information that seem to be unquestionably objectively true. The trouble is, the information has to be passed through a piece of machinery called the human brain, which is vastly limited and all too prone to making bad decisions due to simply not having the whole story. Human beings have a fragmentary relationship to truth. In proving an argument, how do we know there isn't some missing piece of the puzzle that we fail to spot, something that will reshape our deductions? We are creatures with limited minds, always operating with partial-sightedness. That is our relationship to truth, always and forever. We cannot know. We can only do our best to think clearly and to iron out the contradictions and paradoxes in the puzzles we attempt to solve, never knowing what new mysteries lie around the corner. If we can make several puzzle pieces line up snugly, we allow ourselves to feel a measure of confidence and we label such ideas true. And so we should. But we must also understand that what we assert today as truth remains forever open to reassessment by other minds who will tackle the same problems from new angles. We need to appreciate reality as an immensely deep and mysterious arena that we are attempting to map using only 5 senses and a primate brain. The term agnosticism is derived from the Greek word gnosis, to know. With the letter A placed in front, the opposite meaning is intended. An agnostic is one who freely admits he does not know. This is a healthy mental attitude, where one is humble enough to recognize his own limits and shortcomings. There is, however, a pitfall to be avoided. Agnostics sometimes fall prey to an eternally non-committal attitude, where there is an unreasonable expectancy that we ought to be given absolute certainties about the universe before we allow ourselves to flirt with any ideas about it. This leads only to an impotent life devoid of any convictions about truth. Is there anything we can know with absolute certainty? Well, yes. 2 + 2 = 4, for instance. We can have 100% confidence that this is a true statement because it is based on pure logic. Similarly, the question, is it possible to throw 7 on a 6-sided die, should be answered absolutely with a negative. However, outside of mathematics, such certainty is rare, and the more complicated a hypothesis, the greater the danger of error. When seeking the truth, it is imperative that we identify the correct premises on which to build an argument. A premise is a foundational statement that is demonstrably true without exception. Let's apply this to our UFO case study. I will suggest 2 premises that occur to me as a suitable starting point. 1. Stationary objects that are the same distance from a camera will exhibit an identical focus on the resulting photograph. 2. If object A obscures object B, then object A must be closer to the observer than object B. Those 2 premises can be shown by everyday experience to be true without exception. Unfortunately, look where the purity of this kind of logic takes us, to the contradictory conclusion that the UFO must be both close to the camera and far away. What is now required is not deductive logic, but creative thinking. There must be a missing observation that allows the 2 contradictory findings to mesh, but deduction from the premise will not provide it. We are forced into imagining what that observation might be. Progress must involve inductive as well as deductive thinking. If all science were purely deductive, then the entire scientific enterprise would have been completed long ago, because it would have consisted purely of following a logical trail of breadcrumbs from the beginning to the end of the course. Hey presto, the theory of everything. But real science is messy. Sometimes logical deduction brings us to a standstill, or presents us with a bewildering paradox. In those circumstances, we use induction to move forward. That means we creatively imagine answers that are fully supported by the original premises, but not deductively provable from them. In considering premise 1, it occurs to me to ask, What if the UFO is not a stationary object? What if the technology behind this alien craft causes it to vibrate when hovering? That could account for the object's fuzzy focus, while the van remains in sharp focus. In considering premise 2, the branch that's protruding in front of the craft appears to belong to the tree behind it, but is that really the case? What if the branch is actually much, much closer to the camera than it appears at first glance? What if it's not even part of the tree? I would expect the leaves on the close-up branch and the leaves on the distant tree to be drastically different in size, but the type of tree, the overcast weather, and the focal setting on the camera all make this extremely hard to spot. This crafty piece of misdirection provides the very means of secretly holding the miniature UFO aloft. The left side of the craft is actually attached to the branch. The branch could even be a metal pole decorated like a branch. I now have two hypotheses, neither of which I can prove beyond a shadow of a doubt. Both suggest different solutions to the original problem, one providing a reason why premise 1 might not apply, and the other providing a reason why premise 2 might not apply. One positing that the object is a genuine UFO, the other positing that it is a deliberate hoax. Which do we choose as the truth? Where there are two or more competing hypotheses, the one that makes the fewest assumptions is more likely to be the right one. This principle is called Occam's razor. Assumptions in favor of the view that this is a genuine UFO are 1. Earth is being visited by aliens. 2. Alien craft vibrate when hovering. Assumptions in favor of the view that the photo is a hoax are 1. Billy Meyer is a liar. Now, the belief in alien life is certainly not a laughing matter. It's a big universe. But making the assumption that ETs are visiting us requires a leap of faith about which we have no persuasive data, especially in an age where almost everyone walks around with a phone, and a great many phones have built-in cameras. We would reasonably expect there to be a lot more convincing photographic evidence today than in the 1980s. But there isn't. Furthermore, assuming that alien spaceships vibrate when hovering is pure invention out of thin air, imagined for convenience. What we do know for sure is that some people tell lies for personal glamour. Taking all this into account, the safer bet with Occam's razor is the conclusion that Billy Meyer's UFO is a hoax. Occam's razor can, of course, sometimes lead you to the wrong conclusion. It deals only in likelihoods. Notice how we have now moved from pure deductive logic to probability. We've lost the absolutism we were originally aiming for. But in order to make any progress, we had to move in this direction, because deduction without induction took us to a dead end. In the arena of deductive logic, any solution you arrive at is always already in the premise. Reaching it simply involves careful step-by-step deduction. But in this example, the solution was not in the premise. It required imagination. When searching for truth, it's also important to take care that the premises upon which you rely are correct to begin with. It's possible to build massive belief structures upon faulty premises. I've done this myself in the past. When I was a Christian, my mind was filled with all sorts of intricate and interwoven theological principles. The whole picture seemed profound. I could see its validity because I could logically join all the dots. But valid doesn't necessarily mean true. It only means logically consistent within the constraints of the original premise. If the premise upon which the whole edifice of belief relies is shown to be wrong, then everything you build on top of it ultimately fails to stand. And my faulty premise was, the Bible is the inerrant Word of God. The same criticism can be made in the arena of science. As recently as the late 19th century, we relied upon the premise that space consisted of something called ether. Later, we found out that there was no ether, and any science that relied upon its existence needed revision. There have been many such moments in the history of science. The main difference in approach between religion and science is that scientists actively try to prove themselves wrong, while religionists tend to cling to their own rightness in the face of all evidence to the contrary. A scientist looks upon being wrong as a step towards being right by virtue of elimination, while a religionist says, "The answers have been handed to us long ago by divine revelation. They're perfect and not to be questioned." Here's a little thought experiment that illustrates the importance of creative thinking. Take 3 matchsticks and place them on the table, end to end, in the shape of a triangle. Now take 3 more matchsticks. Add the new ones to the original triangle so that you end up with a total of 4 triangles the same size and shape as the first. There's a path to this solution, but it will not be arrived at through logical deduction. What is required here is imagination, an ability to think outside the box of conventional assumption. If you like, take a break from reading for a few minutes and try to solve this puzzle. The failure to solve it rests on a faulty assumption that almost all of us make when first tackling the problem. We assume that the solution must be two-dimensional because the first 3 matches were laid down on a flat surface. But no one enforced this rule. You unconsciously presupposed it. With this realization made, have another think about the puzzle. Did you get it? The simple and elegant solution is to place your 3 additional matches on top of the first 3 in the shape of a pyramid. The 4 faces of the pyramid, including its base, are made up of 4 equivalent triangles. You would never see this with deductive logic. It requires guesswork, creativity, intuition, imagination. When a solution to a problem is not apparent deductively from a premise, there is absolutely nothing unscientific about thinking outside the box. In fact, it's essential. When an atheist debates with a theist, it's common for the atheist to ask, "Where's your evidence for God?" This could also be phrased, "How do I logically deduce the existence of God from the available evidence?" A smart theist will not be fazed by such a question, because he knows there are more roads to truth than examining physical evidence. The fact is, we are confronted with a universe that requires explanation. So we ask, what idea provides the best explanation for why there is a universe? The God hypothesis is one explanation. It's not the only one, it may not be the best one, but it's worth considering nonetheless. And if it provides an elegant solution to the problem of why there is a universe, it should not be dismissed on the grounds that it relies upon creative thinking. If that's your grounds for dismissal, you would have to throw away a great deal of science too. Remember, in our triangle puzzle, we could only solve it by adding an extra dimension. In the same manner, perhaps the puzzle of the universe itself can only be solved by imagining a dimension of existence beyond space-time itself, an unfathomable dimension where cause and effect are transcended in a manner that a mere creature could not possibly comprehend. The imaginative thought, "God may be real, but who or what is God?" holds far more creative potential for modeling reality than the boxed-in materialistic thought, "There is no God." There's nothing wrong with taking your best shot at the truth. If you realize somewhere down the line that you got it wrong, it's no big deal. Simply change your mind and keep right on going, rejoicing in your newfound clarity. Is this not the very process that all human knowledge has undergone from the very beginning? We get some ideas, we run with them for a while, then we figure out some new things and replace the old ideas with better ones. Later, those superior ideas get replaced by further insights that are better still. Knowledge evolves. It was never static in the past, nor is it static in our present day. But for knowledge to progress, we need to do 2 things. 1. Stop defending the notion that what we know will never change. And 2. Be willing to take the puzzle pieces we've got and try to put them together, rather than stare forever at the unfinished jigsaw and refuse to play. When we dig for truth, we might strike gold, or we might strike something that merely looks like gold until carefully examined by eyes more perceptive than ours. Either way, nothing gets done unless you're willing to get your hands dirty. Look up Billy Meyer's photo on Google and have fun confirming my analysis. You'll have no trouble locating the picture. How many wedding cake UFOs are there likely to be, really? You will also come across commentary in favour of the photo's authenticity. Remember the moral of the story. Don't get overly cocky about the truth when you're in possession of a few fragments of evidence in your favour. Sometimes the truth lies in what you fail to see. So if you believe in something with confidence, get out of your comfort zone and study something that potentially contradicts it. The tight constraints of deduction and the fluid guesswork of induction are both required in the task of furthering our understanding. I notice an unfortunate trend among those interested in science to abandon creative thinking and to rely exclusively upon deduction from empirical observation. They are very accurate people, but they will never be pioneers because they've got themselves stuck in a very limited mode of thinking. Mystics seem to suffer the opposite tendency, relying too much upon creative thinking and too little upon logical deduction. They can end up on irrational flights of fancy that are far removed from reality. The key is to understand that the two ways of thinking are not mutually exclusive. They complement each other.